Good morning, church. We are so glad that you have tuned in to worship with us this morning. We've got a great time of worship prepared for you, and it's our prayer that you would be blessed and encouraged through this time that we have together. Let's worship.
I've searched the world. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. You are good, You're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. You are good, You're good. Oh, 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 You're never gonna let me down. 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 'Cause You are good, You're good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. No, 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 no. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. It's true. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause You are good, You're good. Oh, You are good, You're good. Oh.
Have you ever been in the middle of a conversation or an argument with someone and you're working so hard to make sure that the other sees that your point is the right point? Have you ever splurged on a cheat day because you've earned it after a great week of healthy eating and workouts? We all want to know that we're correct. We all have the desire to be justified in our actions and in our words. And when we think about the big things like life and death and suffering, we want to have assurance that we are justified in the eyes of God, right? But how can we be assured that we're really with God? How can we know that we are truly redeemed from our sin and brokenness? Well, Romans 3:28 tells us we are made right with God through faith and not by obeying the law. Friends, this is great news because it means that the only one who can do the work of redeeming us and making it so that we are justified before Jesus is God, is Jesus. Oh yeah,
That's okay.
I
That's
pooped
okay.
on that one.
I'll just bring you to where it says friends. So
Okay.
you're going to start at that a little bit.
Okay, ready? Friends, this is such good news because it means that the only one who can do the work of redeeming us and making it so that we are justified before God is Jesus. It's not about earning our way into heaven and doing enough good things so that Jesus is happy with us. No. But when we choose to follow Jesus, that means we are no longer defined by the things we have or haven't done. We are defined by the cross of Christ. In his death on the cross and resurrection on the third day, we are seen as fully justified in God's eyes. And that is why we celebrate communion each week, to remember that it is only because of Jesus that we are free. So now let's take a few moments to reflect on this good news.
Hey, we are grateful that you are with us this morning, and we are also very grateful for the generous contributions that people like you have made to help this opportunity that we have as a church to take place. And just now, we would love to receive an offering from you, that if you feel like the Lord's leading you or prompting you to support our ministry, please come alongside us and maybe make a one-time gift or set up a reoccurring gift here. We would love for you to partner with us in that way. We're grateful for your generosity. Because of your generosity, we have had hundreds of children that we've been able to minister to on our campus this summer. Because of your generosity, every student who wanted to go to camp this summer was able to go to camp because we were scholarshiping them with the gifts that you have given. It is because of your generosity that our food pantry has blessed hundreds of people in our community. It's because of your generosity that we have had several people give their life to the Lord this summer and be baptized. It's because of your generosity that God's kingdom is expanding in this world. And so just now, we would love to have you come alongside us and continue to support our church with your generous gifts. We are so grateful for them. Now today, we are continuing in a sermon series that's entitled, The Greatest Sermon Ever Preached. And it's not a sermon, as I've said, that I've ever preached. It's a sermon that Jesus preached. It's specifically called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, as I was thinking about today's message that's going to wrap up this series, I was looking at my bookshelf recently, and I was looking at several of the books that I have read that are there. Books like this one, The Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read it, but it's really a good book, and it talks about the significance that small incremental changes in your life can make if you continue to keep them in place over a long period of time. That small habitual changes really add up to make a significant difference in your life. And Atomic Habits talks about that. Another book that I've read is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's the principles of this book that have guided me in how it is that I need to lead through different situations and do different things. Also, another book that's been a blessing to our family is Dave Ramsey's Complete Guide to Money, as many of his principles of how to manage finances have helped us to honor God with our finances. Another book that's been a blessing to my home is The 5 Love Languages, and it's in this book that the author, Gary Chapman, talks about different love languages that people have that we need to be sensitive to if we are going to make sure that they feel loved. But as I looked at these books and many others on my shelf, what I realized is there's a significant amount of knowledge that I have attained from them. But what's interesting about all that knowledge that I have attained, because knowledge essentially equals information attained, is there's a lot of that knowledge that I haven't applied. And we might say that wisdom is not just information attained, but it's also information that is applied. And today, we're going to reflect a bit on all that Jesus has taught us through the Sermon on the Mount. But we're only going to reflect on that just a little bit, because what's really going to matter now is what are we going to do with all of that knowledge? That was the message that Jesus had for his audience. He said to them, all right, now that I've taught you all of this, I've taught you about worry, I've taught you about prayer, I've taught you about how to handle your finances, I have taught you about how it is that you ought to relate to people that you're angry with. I have taught you how to deal with other types of emotions that you have. I have taught you all of these different things. So what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be wise? And as Jesus wraps up the Sermon on the Mount, he's going to talk about two builders. And he's going to say that one is foolish and the other is wise. And I guess the question will be for you is, which will you be? Because those of us that are willing to build our lives around Jesus are the ones who will be wise. And it's those of us that want to go our own way, even in spite of all the information that we have, who won't be considered wise. So let's pick up in Matthew chapter 7 to see what Jesus has to say about this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. And so Jesus again relates knowledge and application with wisdom. And so he's saying, everything that you've heard from me, if you are willing to do something with it, you're like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came and the storm and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, everyone who hears these words but doesn't do anything with them, you hear these words, you're in the right place, but it's just not affecting the way you live your life. You are like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Do you know why something falls with a great crash? It's because it's big. It's because there's been a lot of time put into it, a lot of effort, and quite a bit of time has passed. But then a storm came, as often it happens in different locations, especially if you're on a beach over a long period of time, you're going to have to deal with a major storm at some point. And when that storm came, there was a great crash that happened. And why did it happen? Because they built on sand. Because they had all of the right knowledge, and they did some things with their life, but they didn't apply what it is that they learned. And Jesus is saying to us essentially this: if you have heard everything that I've said, and then you apply it, things are going to go well for you no matter your circumstances. If you hear everything that I'm telling you right now, but don't do anything with it, things aren't going to go well for you when that storm comes. And there's some lessons that we learn from this story that are right along those same lines. And so what do we learn from this story? Well, the first thing that we learn is that everyone builds a house. Jesus said it twice. He said, everyone. Everyone who hears this and doesn't do anything with it, well, they're like this. Everyone who hears this and then does something with it is like this. Everyone builds a house because everyone lives a life. And it's all of the decisions that you make that turn out to build that house that you have. And so the question is, what kind of house are you building? The question is, what are you doing with the house that is your life? Let me say it to you this way. If Jesus showed up at your home, what would it look like? Because here's what we learned from the story, is that your life, it's going to amount to something. But what's going to matter in the end, what's going to really stand, is what God wanted to stand in it. He says this, many are the plans, the writer of Proverbs says this, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And so when your life gets evaluated, what you have done for the Lord is what is going to stand. But if Jesus were to show up at your house, what would he find? Would he find like a place that's all in well order? Or would he find a place that's a mess? I think that for most of us, if you're tracking with me, then you would understand that the Sermon on the Mount is what we are striving for. It's the ultimate example of what our lives ought to look like. And if we were to make that a bit of a illustration for our life, what exactly would it translate to? Like the life you're living, what kind of house would that create if the standard was the Sermon on the Mount? Would it be a house that's really in great order and everything's fine? Or would it be something that's a little off? Or again, would it be just a train wreck? Would it be a house that's maybe just a little bit dated? Maybe like this house that I have a picture of right here that's got some overgrown trees. It has some paint that probably needs to be replaced, or it's a little dated. The windows probably aren't as efficient as they could be. The roof might even need to be changed out. The driveway here needs to be resealed. But all in all, the house is in pretty good shape. Is this kind of what your house would look like? Or would your house look like this picture? That's just an absolute train wreck. It looks like it's a house from the show Hoarders, and then it's gone through, Hurricane Katrina and a few other natural disasters along with it. This place is an absolute disaster, between the ceiling caving in and the old paint colors and the floor that's peeling up and all the else that's going on. I mean, what you have here is something that isn't in good shape. And if your life were to be compared, if your life were to be ran through the filter of the Sermon on the Mount and then translated into a house, what would that house look like? Well, here's the thing. If Jesus is knocking on your door, you don't have to worry about what your house looks like. You don't have to worry about what your life looks like, because he's a master carpenter. And he has come to make everything right. He didn't come to condemn, he came to save. And he wants to come into your life, no matter the condition, whether it's just a little bit dated, a little bit off, or your house is maybe just a complete mess. Whatever it is, he wants to enter into it and help to fix it with his grace and his mercy and his compassion. He wants to get everything exactly as it needs to be. But you got to let him into your house. You're never going to be good enough. There's always going to be something that's a little bit off, and that's okay, because he always has grace and mercy and compassion for us. And we just have to be willing to let him into our life, because everyone is living a life. Everyone is building a house that is their life. And so the first lesson that we learn from the story is this: everyone builds a house, and you just have to let Jesus into it, no matter what its condition may be. The second lesson that we learn from the story is this: what is the nicest to us is not always the best. You see, if I had a choice, if I was going to build a house on a beach, or if I was going to build a house a couple of miles offshore on some strong rock, I'd choose the beach. If that was my choice, that's where I would go. And guess what? I think the person in the story knew that as well. And so they built a really, really big house on that beach. And they seemed to enjoy it for quite some time. And they probably went out onto that beach and they got their tan on, and they maybe did some shore fishing, and they enjoyed the different wildlife, and they had friends and family come and visit them, because who doesn't want to go to a beach unless there's a storm? And then if the storm hits, we don't want to be there. And Jesus said this: but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like that foolish man who built his house on sand. And even though that was the nicest place to put the house, it wasn't the smartest place to put the house. And so let me apply this to our lives. It's like you marrying somebody because of their looks, but ignoring their character. You're building a house on sand if you do that. It's like you pursuing a career or a job because of a high salary, but it not being a good fit for your skill set. That's building a house on sand. It's like you going after a really expensive car. It's nice, but it's not best, rather than an affordable one. Because when you do that, you aren't giving yourself much margin for the storm that may come. You might pursue a spouse that really looks good, but when storms come and life gets hard and challenges hit you, you need someone with character, not just a pretty face. When you're looking at the world around you and just saying, oh, everyone's saved, and you're just trying to be nice because you don't want to look at somebody and say, you know what, that person is separated from Jesus, and guess what? That means that they are going to be separated from him for all of eternity when they pass away because they don't believe in him. But instead, we're nice because that's the nice thing to say is everybody saved. But the reality is what's best is the only people who are saved are Christians. And they're the ones that are going to make it. So that means that we need to go out and tell people about Jesus. It's when we're nice, we say most of the Bible is good. Most of it's good. You know, what aligns with the life that I want to live. But what's best is to say all of the Bible is good, and I need to figure out how to get all of it into my life. What seems nice and good to us is to get revenge. But what's best is to give forgiveness. What's nice to us is to be angry at somebody. But what's really best is to show them love. And so what Jesus is teaching us here, and what he has been teaching us through the Sermon on the Mount, is that what's nicest is not always what's best. And you have to choose what is best. Proverbs says it this way, that there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. You know, it seems right. It seems like this really nice way to go, but in the end, it's not the best way for us to go. It's kind of like the game Jenga. Now, I don't know if you've ever played Jenga. It's this really good game, fun game in which all these little pieces of blocks of wood get stacked up, and at the core for them is simply this block of wood. And then from there, you start tapping out the pieces of wood, and you gradually stack them on top of one another. Now, when is the Jenga game the strongest? Well, it's when it's initially in its original form in that block. But gradually, you start stacking those other pieces on top of it, and it gets much more fragile at that point. But when is it the best to look at? Well, it's the best to look at whenever you've got it stacked up in this weird configuration in which it's just barely hanging on. And as it relates to our lives, often our lives, we pursue the thing that is nicest to us and looks the best, but it's not always the best. And there's a strong path for us to take that can handle a storm, that can handle the tapping and the hitting of this world. But we build up this thing that gets so tall and it's so compromised that it's just going to take a little storm to come along and knock it over. And what Jesus is teaching us here is like, I know it sounded good to build something on sand. I know it sounded good to go your own way, but you need to build on rock. And what I'm telling you to do, how I'm telling you to live your life, is the rock that you need to build your life on. Another lesson that we learned from the parable of the builders is that everyone will face a major storm in life. It really didn't matter if you applied Jesus' teachings or didn't apply Jesus' teachings. It didn't matter, really, if you were there when he was talking or not there when he was talking. It didn't matter at all as it related to if they were going to be affected by that storm. You see, it says this, Jesus promised us this in Matthew 16, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace, but in this world you will have trouble. I mean, Jesus just tells us, you're just going to have problems. And the question is, like, how much margin do you have to handle the problems and the storms that come? I mean, you're just going to have challenges. There's going to be things that happen to you even though you are a Christian. That even though you're a Christian, the cancer will still claim the life of a loved one. Even though you're a Christian, you will probably still have a child that does not seem to get it. Even though you're a Christian, you may still have a ring finger that is ringless. Even though you're a Christian, your divorce might still go through. Even though you're a Christian, you're still going to deal with storms in life. We all do. We all go through it. And what does Jesus teach us? Well, that leads to the fourth lesson. The foundation of our lives is the most important part of our lives. And so what is your foundation? What is the thing that you are hanging on to? What is the thing that is keeping you secure when that storm comes? I have here a picture of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, you may not know this, but Pisa does not mean pizza. I know that might be a surprise to you, but it doesn't mean pizza. It's not a food. Actually, what Pisa means marshy land. Now, imagine that. They build this 256-foot tall structure that is incredibly heavy and large on marshy land. That's probably not going to work out well. And it didn't. And so the Leaning Tower of Pisa would gradually tilt a little less than an inch every year. And it did that for quite some time until they finally were able to use some modern engineering so that way it would keep it from falling over. And so now it's probably not going to fall, at least not for a few hundred years. And so the Leaning Tower of Pisa was built on a poor foundation. And so gradually over time it was leaning until there was some intervention into that structure to keep it from falling over. And what my hope is that through this sermon that there's a bit of intervention that's happening in your heart. My hope is that Jesus is speaking into your life in such a way that you're going to invite him in and you're going to allow him to be the foundation that he is supposed to be. Ephesians says this, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord." Now there's an odd dynamic in the scriptures in which what you find is that Jesus, he's a cornerstone, but he's also the foundation. And then we hear in this Matthew 7 that Jesus is saying, when you apply my words to your life, it's like rock. And so what Jesus is teaching here is that, hey, what I speak is an extension of me. And when you apply what I am teaching to your life, it is like you are following me. It's like you are making me your foundation. Matthew chapter 7 again, Jesus said, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Jesus is the rock. Jesus is the foundation. And when you apply his words to your life, you are allowing them to be an extension. You're allowing those words to come under you and to make Jesus that foundation that he is meant to be. James tells us this: "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says." And that's so important, especially as it relates to our foundations. Because often we make our spouse a foundation, or a career or a job foundation, a child or children our foundation, a parent's affirmation our foundation, our wealth our foundation. But then what happens? A spouse lets you down. You're let go from your job. Your child doesn't want anything to do with you. A parent never quite gives you the affirmation you're looking for. You don't ever quite acquire enough wealth to be independently wealthy. It's like a cup that would be full of water, and you're just getting holes poked into that cup, and the water just keeps pouring out, and you don't ever have anything in you. But what Jesus is saying is like, take that cup that's got all those things in your life, those areas of your life, and put that cup inside of me and allow me to be the one that that keeps you covered. Allow me to be the one that keeps you secure. So that way when those problems of life start poking at you, they don't get in and tear you apart, because I am there to protect you. And these are the false foundations that we often allow to take hold of us when Jesus is meant to be the foundation for us. And often people will think that just because they've attended some services, maybe they grew up in a Christian home, and they've got the right belief, then they're okay. But Jesus has reminded us, in the end, here's the deal. There's a lot of people who aren't going to be okay. There's a lot of people who think they're with him, but they're really not. And do you know why? Because they've just said that they said that they will follow him, but they never applied it. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.' Therefore," and then he talks on, "Therefore, they'll be thrown out, away from him, because they talk the talk, they listened to the sermons, but they never did anything with it." And so maybe Jesus is knocking on the door of your heart right now, and he's wanting to come in and clean up your life. I just want to encourage you to let him do it. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we are so grateful that we can come to you now. Lord, please come into our lives, come into our hearts, come into our homes. And Father, straighten up the things that are messed up. Clean up the messes that we have created. Help us, Lord, to have a home that honors you. And may Jesus Christ be the foundation of our lives. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
All the worries of this world, I will lay them at your feet. Surrender every anxious thought for perfect peace, your perfect peace. All the loved ones I hold dear, all my hopes and dreams and all my fears, I will choose to trust your name in everything, in everything. I will look up, for there is none above you. I will bow down to tell you that I need you, Jesus, Lord of all. Jesus, Lord of all. I will take you at your word. For Jesus, you have taken hold of me. All my life is in your hands. You are my strength. You are my strength. I will look up, for there is none above you. I will bow down Prince of Peace, perfect healer, all my life, all my cares on you, King of Kings, mighty Savior, all my life, all my cares on you, Prince of Peace, perfect healer, all my life, all my cares on you, King of Kings, mighty Savior, all my life, all my cares on you, my cares on you, God. My life, my strength, my hope. I will look up, for there is none above you. I will bow down to tell you that I need you, Jesus, Lord of all. I will look back and see that you are faithful. I look ahead, believing you are able, Jesus, Lord of all. Jesus, Lord of all. You are Jesus, Lord of all. Jesus, Lord of all. Lord of all, my God, my hope in everything. You're my strength, God.
What a great message and a time of worship that we've had together. Don't forget that this Friday, July 30th, is Family Movie Night. We're going to be watching the movie Enchanted together, and we're going to provide popcorn. It's going to be a ton of fun. So doors open at 6 p.m. and the movie will start at 6:30. We hope to see you there. Have a great week, everyone.